Tanner Molendyk is an interesting defenseman to profile because my opinion of him has changed a lot very recently as I was going over a video of him in preparation for this video. Prior to this, I had him at 46 on my board, which is more or less in line with most public scouts, but after this refresher, I think he might struggle to crack my final top 124. Let's take a look into why that is. The main issues with Molendyk's game are related to each other. They are a lack of pace and a lack of hockey sense. What I mean when I say he plays with a lack of pace is that he doesn't see plays developing quickly enough, especially on the defensive side of things. A lot of the time when I'm watching him, I get the impression that he's a little bit overwhelmed by the pace of play, especially when the other team has the puck. You don't necessarily see him obviously panicking, but he is regularly unable to make good decisions when the pace picks up, especially when he's defending in transition and against the rush. This by itself is a pretty major issue, especially for a defenseman. As we all know, hockey is a very fast-paced sport and it only gets faster at higher levels. The NHL is the highest paced league in the world when it comes to hockey, so being able to make good or even just acceptable decisions quickly is very important. With Molendyk struggling with the pace of play at the WHL level, that raises serious concerns about his projectability to higher levels of hockey. While the WHL offers a relatively high pace for junior hockey, in my opinion at least, it is still junior hockey. Every league that Molendyk plays in after this will be faster and overall more difficult to play in. When one watches a player like Connor Bedard, it is obvious why he will succeed at the next level. A big part of that is his raw speed, combined with the pace of the play he's capable of. Bedard is effectively too fast and thinks too quickly for WHL level competition. That being said, I don't want to confuse speed with pace. They are different things. Bedard has both in bunches. Molendyk has speed, but he does not play at a high pace. In other words, his feet are often too fast for his brain. It's one thing if you are physically capable of getting around the ice quickly, it's another thing to be able to do that while stick handling, reading the ice, and making plays. From what I've seen, Molendyk hasn't been able to quite put it all together yet. Where the biggest problems with this arise is on defense. When Molendyk isn't all that comfortable making plays at high pace with the puck on his stick, he is far worse at anticipating and reacting to plays when the puck is controlled by his opponents. He is often too aggressive, attacking the puck carrier while simultaneously creating an open passing lane to another attacker that is wide open. Similarly, he will regularly attack the puck carrier even when said puck carrier is on his D partner's side of the ice. Sometimes he effectively completely abandons his position to attack the puck carrier while defending against the rush. This creates situations where if someone else on his team doesn't cover for him, the other team is going to get basically a free breakaway or odd man rush. That more or less brings me to the second big issue with his game, that being his hockey sense. As I mentioned before, these issues are related, in my mind at least, so it's hard to talk about one without mentioning the other. Before I get too deep here though, I just want to clarify what I mean by hockey sense. This term, and terms like it, such as hockey IQ, are often confusing or just hard to grasp because quite often they mean different things to different people. What one scout calls hockey sense, another scout might call hockey IQ. Another scout might simply refer to general smarts or how well they think the game without putting a specific term to it. Generally, when I use the term hockey sense, I am referring to anything about the game of hockey that involves thinking, planning ahead, and making decisions based on what is happening and what a player thinks will happen next. The best way to judge a player's abilities in this area of the game is to look at their decision making. In the case of Tanner Molendyk, his decision making is at the best of times fine, but nothing special, and at the worst of times it is downright baffling. Here's a play that instantly comes to mind. I'm going to let this clip play a few times because it really speaks for itself. What was the goal here? What thought process led to Molendyk thinking the attacking the puck carrier was the right play? I don't know. Quite frankly, I don't think I've ever seen a player ranked as highly as Molendyk is make plays similar to this as often as Molendyk does. I was so confused when I first saw this play happen that I had to rewind and watch it again to make sure that I saw what I thought I saw. The worst part is that this was not an isolated incident in my viewings of him. This was perhaps the most egregious example, but there were many instances again, especially when defending against the rush, where I was quite simply bewildered by his decision making. And that carries over to all aspects of Molendyk's game. His decision making is just not good. It is the most obvious and most impactful when he is defending the rush, but this also applies to zone defense, transition play, and offensive zone play. In transition, he relies heavily on his ability to skate around players. Oftentimes this works for him because he is a much better skater than your typical WHL player, but this is kind of a bad habit. At the NHL level, he isn't going to be able to just blow past guys in the neutral zone. He's going to have to be more creative in his breakout options, and quite frankly, he hasn't been very adaptable this season. Perhaps with different coaching later on in his development, he can learn to play in a way that is more suited to NHL competition, but that is a risk some NHL team is going to have to take. When it comes to his play in the offensive zone, Molendyk's decision making does seem to be a little bit better. He looks a little more comfortable in offensive situations, but he does still make mistakes based on his inability to anticipate plays. He sometimes makes ill-advised pinches, putting himself behind the play when turnovers inevitably occur. Of course, this happens to even the best defenseman in the world, but a big part of being a successful, offensively minded defenseman is finding the right balance between aggressiveness and conservative play in the offensive zone. In other words, you have to pick and choose the right moments to take risks. In my opinion, based on what I want in a defenseman, Molendyk takes risks too often based on his overall skill level. If he was more of a game-breaking talent like a Cale Makar, then I wouldn't have any problem with it. In fact, I would probably encourage him to take more risks in the offensive zone, but he is not Cale Makar, nor is he in the same postal code as Makar is when it comes to offensive skill sets. For Molendyk, I don't think his risk assessment level is where it needs to be, and for this reason, he is caught up ice more often than I would like. I do believe he anticipates these situations a little bit better in the offensive zone than he does in the rest of the ice, but this is still a fairly major area he needs to work on. If it seems like I've been very harsh on him so far, it's because I have. That being said though, it isn't all bad with Molendyk. I can see why some scouts like him. First and foremost, he is a very fluid skater. He's more than capable of navigating the neutral zone using his above-average speed, strong edge work, and overall lateral mobility. He is also an above-average stick handler, which sometimes makes navigating tight spaces easier for him. Similarly, he is capable of using this combination of skills to deke defenders when activating from the blue line, often opening up ideal passing and shooting lanes. Additionally, Molendyk does show flashes of promise, whether it's a good defensive play or a high-end pass in the offensive zone to create a dangerous scoring chance. He does sometimes do things that a lot of draft-eligible skaters can't. In my sample of his games, Saskatoon happened to be playing Regina quite frequently. Regina has Connor Bedard, the most difficult player to defend in the WHL possibly ever, and certainly this season. In those games, Molendyk was matched up against Bedard somewhat frequently, and he did a rather good job of containing him surprisingly often. He wasn't perfect in these situations, but overall he did just about as well as you could realistically expect him to do. If he can replicate that level of defensive impact consistently when facing all players, maybe he can be a quality defender at the NHL level. At this point though, he is just very raw, very inconsistent. When it comes to his play in the offensive zone, I can kinda see where other scouts are coming from, but overall I'm not super impressed. His off-puck positioning is pretty solid in the offensive zone, and he does have a usable shot. However, his playmaking is mostly simple plays around the perimeter, and his scoring in general seems to come more from the volume of plays he can create rather than from high-danger chances. He finished third in scoring from D-men on Saskatoon this year, behind overagers Aiden de la Gourgendiere, his most common D partner, and Charlie Wright. While points are just one, oftentimes overvalued data point, in this case, I do think they generally reflect Molendyk's offensive upside. generally scoring at about half a point per game in the CHL as a first-time draft-eligible defenseman means there isn't a ton of offensive upside at the NHL level. Players to come out of the WHL since 2015 who scored at a somewhat similar rate in their first-time draft-eligible seasons include Cal Foote, Brandon Carlo, and Noah Juleson. Molendyk would sit third in that group, only ahead of Carlo in points. While using historical data like this and just looking at points is far from the full picture and not necessarily a strong indicator of future success, I do think it is notable as all of these players were drafted higher than Molendyk is currently ranked. Part of the reasoning for that, I believe, is that Molendyk's offensive ceiling isn't really particularly tantalizing, especially considering his flaws on defense. So if Molendyk isn't particularly promising on offense, and he still has very obvious weaknesses on defense, then what kind of role could he eventually play in the NHL? That's kind of a tough question to answer, as I personally just don't really see it with this guy. Maybe at the end of the day, he can become a puck-moving bottom pair guy who struggles to really have a positive impact, but maybe he will get consistent playing time as a serviceable enough guy on a team that is thin on defense. He's also on the smaller side at just 5'11", 176 pounds, and he isn't particularly physical, so he probably isn't going to be a guy that is at least annoying to play against. When it comes to where he will get drafted, I do think he will fall further than where a lot of public scouts have him ranked. If I had to guess, I would say he goes somewhere in the third round. Personally, I would probably avoid drafting him altogether unless he fell very far in the draft. He is very raw and is certainly a long-term project, but even then, with the skill that I've seen from him, the upside just isn't particularly tempting for me. Okay, quick update here. As I'm editing, I've realized that I was a bit too hard on Tanner Molendyk here. He's one of the better skating defensemen in this draft, and he has great potential as an offensive force in transition, and that should not be understated. I still don't think he's going to generate a ton of points at the NHL level, and I'm not the biggest fan of his consistency on defense, but he perhaps has a bit more potential than I initially let on. He won't struggle to crack my top 124, but he will be in the latter half of it. I personally probably wouldn't draft him, but I can see why a team would want to take a shot on him in the third round. If you like this video and want to support the channel, please consider liking the video and subscribing with notifications turned on. There will be a lot more videos like this one coming in the very near future, so be sure to look out for those. If you missed my last video on Dmitry Simashev, I'll leave that one on screen now. It's a lot more positive in this one, as he is my favorite defenseman in the 2023 draft class. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.